Hello and welcome to episode 202 of the Brass Junkies. I am your host, Andrew Hitz, and you are about to hear a very special conversation that I had with a former student of mine who is now all grown up and is a big deal. His name is Andrew Dougherty. He is a tuba player for the Pershing Zone Army Band here in Washington, D.C. Before that, he was a tuba player with the West Point Band, and he is also the principal tuba of the York Symphony. And you are going to hear how he has won 3 auditions in a span of just a few years. He's going to give us some insights. You're going to love this. Real quick, the 2 sponsors I need to thank. Parker Mouthpieces. Thank you to Parker Mouthpieces for providing the hosting for the Brass Junkies. Parker Mouthpieces offers fine, customizable component mouthpieces for horn, trombone, euphonium, and tuba, including the Andrew Hitz Artist Model Tuba Mouthpiece. You can find out more at parkermouthpieces.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And also, the Mary Papert School of Music at Duquesne University has been a longtime sponsor of the show. If you follow the link in our show notes, it will take you to a page that lists their incredible brass faculty and also features a nice video from friend of the pods, Jim Nova, about all of the awesome opportunities you have there as a student. A big thank you to Jim Nova and the rest of the brass faculty for supporting the Brass Junkies. Okay, so the backstory here, this is kind of amazing. I told Andrew that I wanted to do this Winning the Audition with him, which are paid events. I'm throwing this out there for all of you as an episode because I think it's really great, and he gives real specifics about his system. It's awesome. Anyway, I told him that I wanted him to talk about how he had won the West Point Band and about how he had won the Pershing Zone, auditions. And between when he said yes and when we actually recorded it, he won the York Symphony audition in the meantime, which is pretty funny to me. He's got a system that will work for any instrument. So this is not a tuba-specific episode, and he generously shares the details with us. I could not be more proud of him as a former student of mine, although he would have succeeded no matter who he studied with. He's just that kind of person. You can head, by the way, to winningtheaudition.com if you'd like to check out any of the other Winning the Auditions that I have done, which include Chris Martin of the New York Philharmonic, Tom Hooten of the LA Phil, Carol Yonch, the Philadelphia Orchestra, and Hiram Diaz of the President's Own Marine Band. Last thing before we get to it, I want to plug last week's bonus episode again because it was epic. It was 40 additional minutes of Chris Martin and Joe Bergstaller. Joe talked about how he captures his signature flugelhorn sound on recordings and shares a story about a solo failure he had that was so funny that Chris and I were literally wiping tears from our eyes. And there was actually a bonus episode last week too, and let me explain. Joe was running a little late, which Chris busted him about as soon as we started recording, which I thought was hilarious. And Chris and I were chatting, and suddenly I was like, wait, I should be recording this. So I hit record. And Chris talked about the logistics of how the New York Philharmonic selects their programs each season, which I found fascinating, just like about how they identify like conductors, and then they have to work with their schedules. And it's this big jigsaw puzzle. I'd never even thought about it before. And then also he talked about like when he sees the schedule about what the pieces are on the program that make him sit up a little bit straighter when he sees them, which I thought was really cool to hear a player of that caliber talking about that, and also about how that list has changed over the years. So if you would like to check these out, while also helping to keep the Brass Junkies going, you can visit patreon.com/thebrassjunkies to learn how. And our YouTube channel is up to 770 subscribers. The last time I checked, I'd love to get that over 1,000. So if you are on YouTube, hit us up there. And without further ado, let us get to the conversation that I had with tuba player extraordinaire Andrew Dougherty. And today, on a special Winning the Audition, this is the first one of these that features a former student of mine, and his name is Andrew Dougherty of the U.S. Army Pershing's Own. I got the wrong. Say it in the right order for me.
U.S. Army Band Pershing Zone.
That was it. I put bands. I hung on to band too long. So it's so great to see you, Andrew.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Andrew was a student of mine at Mason, and I will say this, that he was a good student. I enjoyed I enjoyed the hell out of working with him. Well, but there was a point, it was like December of his senior year, which all of a sudden, no, and I want to, and I'm not just saying the first part to be nice. It's true. You were good to work with. You were like, you were dedicated. I was like, but then like something like snapped in a good way, and then it was just like it was like a rocket going straight up for 6 months, and then you went and studied with Federally, and then the rocket kept going up and probably aimed even straighter, like straight, and then like you started winning auditions. So, yeah, it's cool to be on the teacher end of that, where you went from like, no part of me was like, oh wow, I really wish that he would get it, and then you got it already, and then all of a sudden you got it to a level where I was like, oh, maybe he didn't get it before, but he's got it now, and that's like well, very briefly, because that's not about auditions. What happened? Was there a decision, or did it just like, do you remember?
Well, I think that summer prior, the summer between my junior and senior year, I think I went out to Disneyland, and I think that kind of opened my eyes.
The All-American Band. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Opened my eyes and my ears to what else is out there, and what the level is outside of, Fairfax, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty, pivotal for me, I think.
That's great.
See, when you brought up December of my senior year, I thought you were going to mention how I texted you saying, "Are you sure I have to come in for my lesson right before my recital?" and I came in for that lesson, and I think you were as red as I've ever seen you.
I honestly don't even remember that. I seriously
Whoops.
don't. That's really funny. That's really funny. So, I was red because it was Christmas time, and I was it was in a very, I was also green. It was just very jovial. That's funny. No, I just remembered just like there was I've seen it before, that something clicked, and yeah, I thought that would be a good place. I didn't plan on it, but I think that's a good place to start, because if you're a student, if you could be doing great, but like there can sometimes just be some convergence of things where you just start working real hard. And I remember one of my go-to lines when a student really starts to get it like that, or comes in like insanely prepared for no apparent reason for just a random lesson, and then they just like plow through the assigned material in like 6 minutes, and then it's like, okay, what do we do with the next 54? I always like to sarcastically say, okay, don't read into this. It's a complete coincidence that you had a really focused week of practicing, and then we got through this in 6 minutes. Don't draw a correlation between the two things, and that always gets a big smile. So, okay. So auditions. You have now won the West Point band audition. You've won the Pershing's own audition. You just won an audition since this was announced. You won yet another audition. That's pretty good for marketing for the York Symphony. Talk us through the military band auditions. How far ahead of time is the list generally announced?
Mm-hmm. So generally there's it has to be posted 2 to 3 months ahead of the date of the audition.
Okay.
And more frequently, it's even further along than that, especially if a band or an orchestra is doing a tape round or a resume round.
Okay.
Right? So if it's a tape, it's usually 6 months before the live audition will be held.
Mm-hmm.
And but whatever is announced, you can pretty much guarantee 2 to 3 months. And that obviously, I think it goes without saying, but that's not when the preparation starts. But that's when you really figure out like where the focus is going to be maintained.
Right. That's not when you're like, I think I might want to do this tuba thing for a career. Yeah,
I'm gonna do this for real for now.
Okay, so you get the list. Let's just say it's, I don't know. Let's say it's 3 months out. Okay, What is the first thing that you do when you get the list?
Well, the first thing I actually, this is a really weird little detail, but I like to print them all out and I like to get them bound, because there's just something for me that if I have a physically bound audition list, rather than like on an iPad or on the computer or something, I'm gonna just pay a lot more attention to it if it's in my hand. And maybe that's like kind of an old school thing to do, but it works for me just to be like, I'm taking this seriously, right?
You just hate trees.
Yeah, well, that too. I should do a thing. I plant a tree for every audition I take. So
if you plant a tree for every audition you win, you're like starting a mini forest here, which is good. Uh,
Three-fourths, the three trees.
That's
So,
that's interesting though, because you can kind of get more of a scope of it. Yeah, like I use all of my music is digital.
mhm,
If I buy a book, I scan it, and then just for my own purposes, I throw it into Dropbox. But it's just like this like nebulous, massive thing that it's like yeah. Whereas
mhm,
a list, I bet I would do this. I used to do it because that was the only option,
yeah.
way back when I was taking auditions. But that's kind of neat that you and do you put it in a specific order or
Whatever order that the orchestra or band has put out. But
okay.
what I'll do from there is I will obviously, like, it's very important that if you're auditioning for something, you figure out what are your weaknesses and what are your strengths very quickly,
Right.
because there may be something on the list that you feel like, I've been practicing the ride for 10 years. I know I need to do a little polishing, but I know it really well. And then there might be something on there that you're obviously completely unfamiliar with. And so I would say three tiers, right? Tier one being very unfamiliar or needs a lot of work tier.
Okay.
And I try to spend roughly 50% of my time in that area in tier one.
Okay.
Tier two is like, I know it pretty well. Maybe I haven't touched it in a little while, but I think I could, needs a little bit of polishing, needs a little bit of work. Tier two. Tier three is things I know very, very well. So when West Point came up, there was the tape round. They wanted the whole Penderecki, and I was not familiar with. I mean, I was familiar with it, but I had never worked it up, and so that was, huge tier one item for me. Was like even when that came out, I was like, I don't even know if I can play this. Okay, here we go. But that was something you want to spend the majority of time on that. And then the next thing I do, and I started doing this when I took the Army band audition, is I don't even know if you can see this, but I had these, like, basically a piece of paper with tons of X's. And
Oh.
I have every aspect of my routine, and then I have every piece that's on a list. And what I'll do is, like, day by day say, all right, today I'm comfortable not touching, Meister Singer. Or
Wow.
I'm comfortable not touching Stars and Stripes, but that means that I need to, just track. And you can see there's definitely, there's things that there's an X almost every day, and there's also days off, and we'll talk about that.
Okay.
But there's pretty much like, the solo every single day there's an X because I was not familiar with it, and it was definitely my weakest thing.
There's a lot of ear work that goes into the Capriccio. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, and it was a slog for sure.
Yeah.
Especially like being on a tape round too, because like in a live round you play the Capriccio, it's like, okay, there's a few flubs there, but it's it's live, it's a live performance, that's understood. But a tape round, getting a clean take of the whole thing was not easy and not fun.
So super intentional, like really, really intentional.
Yeah. I think after I had a few auditions where I felt like it was mostly about getting the day of to be consistent, and then working back from there.
Okay.
It's like if I want the day of to be a normal day for me, like just a normal Tuesday that I would just sit down and practice, then I need to do things differently, working up to that and getting more methodical rather than just like, I've never been great about like a practice journal. And it was especially doing auditions when I was like, I need to do something that's a little bit more smart with how I approach preparing this.
Wow. Yeah. All of the winning the auditions that I've done, I spoke with Carol Yonch about this. I spoke with Tom Hooten, principal trumpet of the LA Phil, about this. They're all similar, where it's not just great players, but it's great players who have a system in place. And so it's not just play the tuba really well as frequently as I can, and then on the day
Right.
of the thing play the tuba well. Um, You had mentioned going back a little bit. You had mentioned the tier one, which is what needed a lot of work. You spend about 50% of your time. How did the tier two and tier three go in terms of percentage of time spent?
Yeah, probably 30% for tier two and 20% for tier three.
Okay.
Just because there, you also never want to avoid like not practice something because you think any excerpt for me, for you, for anyone, or for Carol, or any aspect of our playing. If it's like, oh, for me, I feel like low range is something that has been more natural to me than the upper range. And so upper range is something that every single day is like I'm spending dedicated time in the upper range. Whereas my low range, I can pretty consistently say, I can come back to it. I can fall back to it.
Yeah.
That being said, if I totally ignore it, right? If I were to spend 0% or 10% of time in that tier three,
Right.
then there may be some bad habits that creep into place.
Right. Yeah. So what I'm hearing here is a whole lot of self-awareness. I'm hearing a lot of self-awareness as to what your baseline skills are. I'm then hearing self-awareness that you layer over the list itself so that you said that you got to really quickly figure out what you can and cannot play.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, the Penderecki was obviously, was quickly like in the, yeah, this is tier one, because that's not a solo that you just kind of play. Like, yeah,
Right.
you got to work that up. And then coming up with a plan of what to work on, because the answer is not to work on everything every day, or you run out of time, you run out of face, you run out of concentration.
Yeah, absolutely. Some lists, I mean, some lists may be 11 pieces. I've rarely seen anything fewer than 12 or 11, but some are over 20. And some orchestras are even longer than that. And so it would be unrealistic to think that you are going to spend the adequate amount of time on everything every single day.
Right.
Um, the other important thing, obviously being very regimented with what I'm practicing, but also when I'm practicing.
Hmm.
And I had this moment in grad school when I felt like I was just like working my butt off. I felt like I was doing everything I could do, and I'm sure you and I had talked about this a little bit. I was working at Mason, but then I was driving to College Park, Maryland, to go to school at night, and I felt like I was basically just using 100% of my time and energy on balancing work, balancing my life, and balancing the tuba. And I think I had spoken with you, and I think we were talking about either an upcoming Army audition, and you were like, yeah, I was just talking with some Georgia students, and they're like getting up at 4 a.m. and practicing because they're going to work or something. And I don't even know if that's true, but that absolutely was like,
No,
oh
it
no,
it was
oh
that was
no.
actually when Zirkle had to take a medical
Yep.
leave, and
Yep.
he got a bunch of people. I filled in for him at Georgia for a week,
Yep.
and so I gave them all lessons, and that I do
Yep.
remember having that conversation with you. Yeah, that was not to scare you. Yeah, that was true. So
And similarly, when I was at Maryland, I had this basically the same conversation with Federley at the time, and I said, I think I came into a lesson probably less prepared than I should have been, and he said, what's your practice schedule look like? I was like, well, I go to work, and then I practice for like 30 minutes, and then I sit on the Beltway for 2 hours, and then I practice when I'm here, and then after class or after rehearsal I'm practicing. And he said, what do you do, before you get to work? I wake up and I eat something, drink a lot of coffee, and go to work. It's like, okay, well, maybe you need to wake up earlier. And I was getting up at 6:45, and it was like, okay, and that's not something I've like continued long term. I don't today get up at 4 a.m. and practice for 2 hours,
good.
but
That's
I
not
did.
sustainable.
Right, right. And it was mostly not so much about getting a I don't want to say like a volume, because I've heard numbers thrown around between people of like what's the number of hours I need to practice. Is it 3? Is it 1? Is it 9? I've heard pretty much everything from 2 to 3 to 9 plus, and and I think, you and I agree on this. It's different for every person. But most importantly, for me, it was a matter of what can I sustain the highest amount of concentration? For what duration can I sustain the highest amount of concentration?
Yes.
And what was very helpful with practicing early in the morning was that there's no one calling me, no one texting me. There's, every time I, out of poor habit, go on Instagram, there's nothing coming up because no one's awake.
Right.
On
either coast.
Yeah, and no algorithm would even give me anything new to look at. So it was like, okay, I guess truly the only thing I have to do right now is to practice. So I would try to get about 2 hours in before I would go to work. And that proved to be some of the most dedicated and focused practice that I was doing at that time. Because other times things are happening, I'm stressed, I'm worried, whatever. But it was like almost meditative. It's like there is nothing happening from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. This is the only thing I have to do. So for me, that right number after getting a job and trying to get another job was about 3 sessions a day. They don't have to be morning, afternoon, evening, but they can be. And I would do 1 to 1.5 hours per session. So much so that I would actually set a timer on my phone. I would do a 25-minute block, 5-minute break, and then another 25-minute block, 25 to 30-minute block. Mm-hmm. And then that would be my first practice session. And maybe that's all tier 1 stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then successive sessions, same thing, 25 minutes on, 5-minute break, 25 to 30 minutes on, and then break. And that way, I think it's very helpful because you don't really become overwhelmed if you kind of compartmentalize your practice. And it's like, all I have to worry about right now is tempo and stars and stripes.
Yes.
And that is it.
Yes.
I know there's other things behind me, other skeletons in the closet,
mm-hmm.
but they don't matter right now because I'm going to spend 25 core minutes on time in, this piece or whatever.
Right. Yeah. It does not help the bottom of the first page of the Penderecki get better if while you're practicing Stars and Stripes, you're freaking out about the last 3 lines of the first page of the Penderecki. It's not like worrying about that makes it better. It just makes all of it worse because you're not present. You're not actually making anything better, but you're also shooting time here and time here. And yeah, it's so important to stay as focused as you possibly can on the task at hand. I've actually started. This session's not about me, but I have started whether it's doing work or it's practicing. I have started not only having like a very clear goal of what I want to practice or work on for that chunk of time, and there's a timer set, but I've also started stating something out loud that I want to leave outside of the session. So if I'm practicing and I've got and I've got to set up like an entire sales page for the tuba workshop, which takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of writing copy and getting the words. It's like all kind of like high brain, power stuff. Mm-hmm. I leave that completely out because it's so easy to be warming up and to just be thinking like, oh crap, I got to do that. Oh crap, I got to do that. And I just leave that whole tuba workshop out. And then I'm playing and I'm present and I'm practicing improv or whatever. And that's been a very good trick for me. How did you figure out when you operated best? Was it just by trying things in terms of like morning, afternoon, night, or was it just kind of whenever your schedule allowed it, you practiced, or how did that work?
I mean, yeah, to be honest, a little bit of both, of course.
Right.
I think it's about. I don't know if I have a time of day that I work better than others. I mean, I'm definitely more of a morning person by nature.
Okay.
So practicing pretty much first thing in the morning is very helpful. Like there's something very calming if you have the time to sit down with, a cup of water, tea, coffee, whatever you have, and just know that like for the next hour, this is the only thing I have to worry about. And the only thing I'm going to do right now is I'm going to enjoy my warm up. I'm going to be relaxed. And that's all I'm going to do. Yeah. And for me, also doing it when I never practice well if I'm coming from something that has been laborious, right? So if I just sat in a lot of traffic, it's almost counterproductive for me to then immediately go practice because I'm just tense, right? And I'm just maybe frustrated, and that all that effort and all that muscle is gonna go into my practice. It's gonna go into my playing, and it may create bad habits.
Yeah.
So I try to, whatever it is, if you need to cool down for a bit, if you've been sitting in traffic, if you had a bad day at work or something, try to recreate the kind of meditative state that you want to practice in before you start.
And what do you do to do that? Is it breathing? Is it stretching? Is it yes?
Yeah. So I do the same thing, and this kind of goes into the day of the audition thing. I do the same thing the day of the audition that I do before I play. I don't do this like every single time I play, but I will do this at the beginning of a practice session. It's very simple. I just breathe in naturally. I breathe out, but I hold the out breath for about 4 or 5 seconds. Just hold that for 5 seconds. Breathe in, not like sucking air in, but just letting my body expand the way it normally expands. And then maybe I'll do that a few times in a practice session, just to kind of like release the tension, because we're all, it's going to happen that you're going to have some tension sometimes, and that is a natural thing, and we just need to figure out ways of relieving that. So on the day of, when I'm sitting down on the stage ready to go, and first excerpt up, whatever it is, I'll sit down with my horn, and I'll do the exact same thing. Breathe in, breathe out, wait 5 seconds, and then natural breath in, and then I start the more of like hearing the tempo, hearing what I want to sound like. But it's like a moment of silence, before every excerpt.
Wow.
And in an audition, I will do that before every single piece.
That's great. And it's not, I think that anybody knows that you're supposed to like clear your mind before you start, but you just hit on something really important, which is that you have a specific way that you do that you do every single time you practice, so that it's not this new thing of, I need to calm down here, and then that you're just like, no, I need to do the thing that I always do, like in the exact way that I do it. And you can agree with this earlier in auditions. I know when I first started taking auditions, it felt like everything was going really fast, right? Like it felt in some ways like if I took the time to inhale, exhale, wait 5 seconds, that the proctor was going to be like, are you going to like play did you bring the tuba to like buzz into it? Or are you going to just like sit there, but they're not in that big of a hurry, because
they really are not. And you would be surprised at how quickly people tend to go, like you're saying, it feels fast. And because there's silence, it's like,
yes,
there's kind of this natural fear.
It's like silence on a date, right? Where it's like where it's like 2 seconds of silence on a date, with the first date with someone, where you're just like, it feels like like a movie went by. But just know that your instincts are not your friend there in an audition, because you've got a lot more time than you think.
Yeah, I think there's really a lot to be said for, and you said this, making sure, like, auditioning is very weird, right? It's not something, you may only get the opportunity to audition once, twice a year, sometimes 0 times a year, depending on the year. And it's very hard to recreate, sitting in a warm-up room for 3 hours, and then walking up some stairs, and then sitting in a hall where it's just dead silent. It's very hard to recreate that in your practice. So what you do have to do, right, because you may not sit in a room for 3 hours just to simulate, purely for the practice of simulating an audition. So what you do have to do is you have to make sure that everything you can control is premeditated and it's done. You know? And that there's, in some ways, you do want to go into like an autopilot. You want to go into, like you were saying, we all know we need to clear our mind right before we play. But I think most of us would say what that looks like is you sit down and you say, be cool, clear your mind. All right, come on, relax. Right? And in effect, we're really just like screaming at ourselves and making ourselves more stressed, Whereas if we had something, to fall back on, that was natural and we've done
Familiar.
100 times,
Yes.
yeah, it would be, your body is much more readily going to slip back into that comfort state.
Yeah, screaming "relax" at yourself is kind of like I don't remember which movie it's from, but the line is the beatings will continue until morale improves. It's just kind of like where it just doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
That's really great. So you control everything that you can because there's so much that you can't. You can't control the temperature. You can't control the order of the excerpts. You
Yep.
can't control whether you're the last one before lunch or the first one after lunch, or whether
Yep.
what the warm-up room vibe was like, or any of the above. But doing the same thing to like to re-clear the deck before each piece. That's really great advice, and you got the payout because of work that you had intentionally done in the practice room. That's great. I want to circle back to the day of. I want to ask one other question at least about the preparation. So
Hmm.
you said that when you started preparing that it was like 50% is tier 1 needs work. Tier 2, which needs like some polishing, is 30%, and then know really well is 20%. That was again, I just threw out a random hypothetical of 3 months. Let's say 2 months, or let's say a month before the audition. What do those percentages look like ideally? Are they like 100% in tier 3, or is there still some that's in tier 1 and tier 2?
Hmm. I mean, in a perfect world, that tier 1 would have been brought up to the level of, the stuff really well by
Mm-hmm.
that time.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm kind of a firm believer of, you're not going to learn anything new 2 weeks out from the audition, right?
Right.
So if the audition is May 1, April 15, you need to be ready to go. Because at that point, there's not really anything that's going to be committed to muscle memory by the time you hit May 1. And, go a step further, ideally, the 2 weeks prior to the audition is just getting yourself comfortable. I actually, I'll circle back to the tiers in just a second, but one
Great.
thing I did want to mention, I really like what a lot of Olympians do. So obviously Olympians, they have 4 years, or really it's a whole lifetime of training. But the 4 years prior to the Olympics, they're hitting their routines every day, maybe 5 days a week or whatever it is, 6 days a week. But they're training the hardest, the furthest from the Olympics. So it's like, the month after Summer Olympics are done, that's when they're really hitting it.
Right.
And condense that to a audition schedule. 3 months out is when it's, green light go time. That's when it's practice, the most dedicated and the most efficient practice you can do, but also probably the most amount of work you're going to do,
Mm-hmm.
at least having the horn on the face. 1 month out, I don't decrease it a ton. If I've been doing 4 or 5 hours, 3 months, 2 months out, I'll start to taper slightly, but especially the 2 weeks out and the week out. 2 weeks out, I'm probably going to only play 2 to 3 hours a day, and then the week out, I really only play like an hour a day. An hour of practice a day. I may have to play for other things, but an hour of sitting down and practicing the rep.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, by that point, it's my belief you're not going to learn a whole lot more, and things aren't going to get drastically better. So what's better is actually to more take care of your tissue, take care of your face. But you need to, in the same way that sleep is the time that we actually really recover, you need recovery, but you also need that time for things to be committed to your mental ear, to your ear, and to your face. So I think a lot of people do the opposite. I tend to taper before the actual date. So with the tiers, though, that's like I said, pretty much a month out, you want everything to be about even. It's a good time to bring up the things that you are more comfortable with and say, all right, I'm going to readdress ride, whatever it is. I'm going to readdress Fountains of Rome and make sure that's actually where I want it, and kind of check in. And then the things that, if it's Penderecki or whatever it is, for this last audition I took, for me, like Heldenleben was something I was not as comfortable with.
Okay.
So I spent a ton of time at the beginning preparing that, and then about equal, one third, one third, one third, about a month out.
Wow. So tapering off, and I like that within 2 weeks you're not really implementing new stuff, that you're just kind of maintaining and treating your body and your mind, as well as you can to be primed to perform at your best. Okay, so that's great. Well, and actually, sorry, I want to ask you one more question about prep. I remember talking to you about this before, and you had talked about practicing at half speed, right? For a while. Can you talk about that? Because I seem to
Yes.
remember that it was like you did it a lot for a while, which was
Yes.
remarkable.
I should have mentioned this.
That's
If
okay.
there's something that, in band auditions, it's very common to have circus marches or really fast, frequently double-tongued marches. And I would say if I have 3 months to work on one of those marches, I will probably spend 75% of that time at half speed. Or sometimes if tempo's, let's say 160, I'll spend most of it at quarter note equals 80 or half note equals 80. And then I'll spend, gradually I'll maybe approach 120, but I don't even really try to get to the full tempo until about a month out. And the reason I do that is because I think that in my experience, when I've practiced things, if I see, a march that's marked at 160 and I start practicing at 160, there's so many things that I'm going to be doing that are like extraneous effort, and I may not realize that I'm doing it because it's going by so fast.
Right.
And so I will practice like, oh my gosh, my double tongue it's too heavy. I need it less tongue. And I'll practice that for much longer than I need to. Whereas if I had started slow and kept it slow for a long time, over time, you're kind of going to reinforce what will happen faster, right? If you get the habits of light tongue when you're double tonguing fast, if you get the habits of good phrasing when you're going at half tempo, proper sound, proper dynamics, and maybe most importantly, the ease of playing, right? Playing a circus march at half tempo is really easy. And if you keep doing that, but perfect that, by the time it's ready to bring it up to tempo, you will have in muscle memory, you'll have phrasing, great sound, ease of playing, no tension, fingers are going to work the way they're supposed to, and you're not going to just dive headfirst into the deep end.
Right.
So,
that takes discipline.
I practice a lot, even things that aren't super fast, I will practice very, very slow.
Okay. Yeah, that takes so much discipline. But it's ironic that it takes so much discipline because it's actually the shortest path. So it just doesn't feel like it, right? That's
I think for me, it takes not worrying about getting it up to tempo takes a lot of the pressure off. If I'm practicing it thinking, oh my gosh, how is this going to get to 160? How is this going to get up to tempo? I'm thinking another thing I'm thinking of is the end of Symphonie Fantastique, that C major arpeggio, right? I figured, all right, I need to triple tongue this because I just have a really slow single tongue, and my triple tongue at tempo was not good.
Thank you for your honesty, Andrew.
It's just reality. So it was like, I have to triple tongue this. Okay. Some people can single tongue it. I have to triple tongue it. And I need to practice it really slow.
Right.
Because if I kept it at tempo, I was doing weird things with my tongue, but it also, again, going back to the only thing I'm working on right now in this 25-minute block or this 1 hour block is slow triple tonguing of a C major arpeggio. That's it, And that 25 minutes or that 1 hour that I will have spent on that without the pressure of getting it, maybe I play it down an octave, maybe I play it the written octave. It makes me play it in a better way than if I were to be like, I know this has got to be fast. It's got to be loud too. It's the end of the piece. And it's, so removing a lot of the things that do make things difficult, same thing with Heldenleben. I would play that down a lot, down the octave, at least the muted section. I'd play that down the octave because I was struggling with, I could hear it. but I was really struggling with getting accuracy. So, take out the difficult thing, perfect the pitches, make sure it's not only in my ear, but it's being executed, and then when you're ready, bring it up the octave.
In my experience, there are a lot of musicians. Just about everybody knows that if you've got to play a circus march and it's fast and you can't play it, that you need to slow it down.
Right.
But it's my experience that there's an awful lot of people who slow it down either not far enough or almost immediately start speeding it back up before it's actually ready. So I think the discipline part is actually just staying the course and saying I'm like, but again, I like there's intention behind everything that you're saying here, because it's like for 25 minutes I'm going to slowly triple tongue the end of Symphonie Fantastique. It's not even I'm going to speed this up as much as I can while it's still clean.
Right.
Nope, it's slow for 25 minutes, and then I get to stretch my legs for 5 minutes, and it's just the task that's right in front of you. And when you give parameters that are that specific to a practice session, it is very hard to not stay on task. And I would say it's very hard to stay on task when you just go in with the goal of making Symphonie Fantastique better. Or worse, just making your excerpts better, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm guilty of that. Everyone's guilty of that, right?
Of course.
It's just,
yes.
I don't know. It just needs to be better. I just know it needs to be better.
Yes.
And in a way, that mindset is so much more difficult to reach your goal, because you almost don't have a goal.
Right.
You need to make smaller goals.
Yeah, that's great. Before we get one more thing about preparation, when you get frustrated, either within a session or maybe you have a few sessions you have a day where none of the 3 sessions are great. They're not necessarily all bad, but feels like a couple of days in a row where things aren't exactly rocking. They were better 5 days ago. How do you deal with that? Do you just get over it, or is there something specific like the breathing exercise you gave before? How do you keep the mindset, in a positive
forward
way? Yeah.
Well, I'd love to say I'm better at that than I am, but I succumb to the, what the heck is happening right now mentality. Even, I would say almost every audition I've had, probably that 3-week period is when something happens, and sometimes my reaction to that is to step away, because I don't want to reinforce things that I haven't been doing the whole time. And other times, you also dive headfirst into trying to make it better. But I think, it's a toughie. I don't know. I think, as they say, having the shortest memory can be one of the biggest blessings in music, and just being like, well, it's a bad day, forget it. In some ways, it's like you're almost tricking yourself, because if you had a bad session, it's like you had a bad session, and things for whatever reason just went awry.
Yeah.
But it's really important to try to put those things out of mind as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And same thing goes for the day of. It's like everyone is going to make a mistake in an audition. No audition is perfect ever. And it's more about, you can have, if you're a clarinet player, you can have the biggest squawk in the world. If you're a tuba player, you can absolutely flub a note. And I know this is cliche, but it truly is about that next note that matters. Because if I'm on the panel of an audition, or if I'm auditioning, if I miss a note, now I know it's kind of like, whatever, but it's like, keep time, keep your musical line, and keep composure. And that is, it's almost more impressive when somebody has a huge clam and then it's immediate as if it didn't happen.
Right.
To me, that's if I'm on a panel, I'm like, wow, that's awesome.
Yes.
And so the same thing, expand that over a longer period of time. If you have a clam of a practice session, or if you have a few days where you're just in a bit of a fuzz, do everything you can to reset. Go back to what you were doing. Go back to what was working. And that's another thing too. Just it's always good to play something you like and are good at. If you need a little bit of self-assurance, just say, all right, you know what? I'm just gonna play. For me, it's like, my home base is low register. I'm just gonna play a rotating down the octave.
Yeah,
a Snedeker or something.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play home base and just
Yep.
make myself feel good right now.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I
Tuba self-care,
I always, it's so important. I always say that you can't take any one data point and run too far with it. Could be an excerpt, could be a session, could be a day. Because also somebody who plays tuba as well as you do, who operates a tuba as well as you do, and has an ear as good as yours, it is possible for you to play a section of the Penderecki really well, even before you really, really, really hear it. Like if you're like super early in the process. But if you make the mistake of going like, okay, well, I got that section now. And it's like, well, no, because it's like you've got it kind of in your ear, but not, it's not set in stone. Like there's still some heavy lifting to do there. And so it can be in either direction where you say, oh, this is everything's going amazing. Or, I try to, rather be this, just to be like this, where the highs are a little less high, the lows are a little less low. And it's just like, the important thing is that it's moving forward.
Right.
Okay, let's get to the day of the audition now. To put us there. So, and I know that each audition is different. There's not just a typical audition, but you don't know what number you're going to be, right? You don't know. So, put us in. How about in your Pershing's Own audition? What happened in the morning? Like, how did that all unfold?
So I always love when the audition, every group puts out like, all right, check-in time is at 8 a.m. or whatever. And I showed up to my Pershing's audition at 7:30, and I was the last person to check in, which was like, cool. That makes me feel good.
Apparently you all are taking this pretty seriously. Yeah,
exactly. It was like, wow, okay. And they weren't even supposed to open the doors before then, but I'm sure it was it was in the winter, so they were like, all right, come on in. I guess you can check in now if you want. So I think people have fears about drawing number one or drawing number 88. I drew number one at West Point and number one at Pershing's. And I'm not saying that is a better number. I'm just saying that it is more important to whatever number you get, figure out what are you going to do. Because, thankfully it seems that some groups have shifted towards a staggered check-in time, which is great. It means you don't draw number 90 and then you have 7 hours to kill.
That's horrible.
Which, again, it's like you need to have a plan for that, right?
Right.
Because it's possible. You need to have what am I going to do?
And if you're on a military base, you can't just like go off base and then you can't just waltz right back through the gate.
You need food and you need activities.
Right.
Maybe it's a precursor to how you think you're going to do, but a lot of people don't show up to auditions with food, and that's super. I know I'm kind of going on a tangent right now.
No, this is vital. This is exactly the way I do these. This is vital. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's shocking how many people don't come with food, whether they're expecting to advance or not. There was no audition I took where I expected to advance. I hoped, but I certainly didn't expect. But I also brought food,
right?
Because I know I don't like to play on an empty stomach.
Right.
So anyway.
What food did you bring?
I usually bring like a sandwich of some sort. I won't say I go super. I don't want a ton of sugar. I guess that's I don't want to drink a Coke and I don't want to have lots of fruit. I will have some bananas.
Okay.
But I don't want a lot of sugar. And I also I want something reliable. I want something super plain. So I usually have a turkey sandwich and water or something. But something that is not going to make me feel great and it's not going to make me feel bad. I'm not going to have a gastronomic moment in the audition. I just want something reliable.
You just made a good case because that was a super sad sounding, it's lunch. You're just sitting by yourself waiting for your number to be called while you're eating a plain turkey sandwich with water. It's not even cold. Yeah.
All the good food and everything else comes after.
Yeah, there you go. When they say you won, then that's when you can enjoy all of it. So
yeah. So anyway, check in. yeah, when I got to Pershing's, it was, all right, I drew number one. I was like, okay, here we go. And at that point, it can be a little nerve-wracking because you may only have 15 minutes. And I usually, will try to have some sense of a warm-up before. But if it's a 7 a.m. Check-in time, it's kind of challenging. You're not going to get like as warmed up as you would if you had practice for 2 hours or something. So
Sure.
At least being comfortable with like, do I have a warm-up that I can have ready in 5 minutes? Yes. What am I going to play? That was another thing. I got really into the nitty-gritty with the Pershing's audition, and I figured out exactly what am I going to play if they say you have 5 minutes.
Wow.
Or if they say you have 5 hours, what am I going to play? Importantly, you don't want to overplay, of course, but if you have 5 minutes, you need to be able to it's less about being warmed up and it's more about just being comfortable, right? Because like I said, it can be freaky if they say, all right, you're number one, it's 8:40, you're going on at 9. It's like, okay, I know I have my thing in my back pocket that I can play, because I've been playing it for 3 months, and I know I'll feel sufficiently warmed up at the end of that, or whatever, or just mentally ready.
Mm-hmm.
So I had that kind of pre-planned, and that's exactly what happened, right? Like they said, number one, okay, here we go. And then go into my practice room, do my routine, and then, basically get ready. The knock on the door comes, walk out the hallway, walk into the hall. And obviously any hall, some you may have played in before, some you may not have played in. I stopped doing the play a few notes in the hall thing pretty early on, just because frankly, I heard some people say never ever do it, and some people say absolutely do it, and I didn't feel like it was going to help me, because the other thing is I don't want to adapt to the hall. I don't want to hear a lack of feedback or more feedback than I'm expecting and change what I'm doing based on the hall. So a couple of preparatory notes are not going to help me. If anything, it's going to maybe psych me out. Like, oh my gosh, this hall is so much drier than I thought it was going to be.
Right. Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh.
That's never calmed anyone down in history.
Yeah, I
hearing
don't
that
feel,
in their head.
I don't feel like I'm getting any sort of dynamic feedback. I'm going to play a lot louder.
Right.
And I have done these things. That's why I'm saying this, because, I have my list of auditions, and I'm like, oh yeah, that audition, I remember the hall being really different than I thought it was going to be. I remember playing much louder than I am accustomed to playing.
Right.
And I left that round thinking, if I get cut, I know exactly why I got cut, because I executed things about the level I expected to, but I changed something. And the thing I changed was I played way louder because I wasn't receiving the feedback I thought I was going to.
Right.
So I don't do any of those preparatory notes. I sit down, I do my 10-second breathing thing, and then pretty much go from there. But, I try to think of it like if you ever watch any good athlete, right? It's less apparent in things like football probably, but you can really see it in like swimming, golfing, and I'm sure there's other sports I'm thinking, but golf comes to mind for me. A good golfer, every single time they step up to the tee box, they will do the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Yep.
And no matter if it's the easiest shot they're going to hit in their life, or if it's, if they're down 20 strokes, or if they're in the lead by 5 strokes, they're always going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to do before I play. Every excerpt, I don't worry about the proctor. I don't worry about the committee's time, even though that may sound bad. I just worry about, all right, do the thing that I'm accustomed to doing. And if I treat this like I'm practicing, I will probably play it like I'm practicing, which if I'm practicing right, it should be at a high level.
Yeah. Well, you don't worry about the committee's time because what your brain is telling you is usually not accurate, because it feels like you're wasting a lot of time when you're not actually. And so that's a way to trick yourself into going too quickly.
It's like good food, right? the customer will always wait 5 more minutes for a much better meal than something that's undercooked, underseasoned, or underprepared.
Yeah.
You know, the committee will always wait 10 more seconds if you're putting out your best product.
It's a great soundbite right there. Yeah, I want to point out again intentionality that we're hearing throughout this entire hour. You got in, you didn't get in late, but you were the last person to arrive. You draw number one. You've got like the shortest warm up, obviously, by of anyone. It wasn't an issue of you just remaining calm and then getting warmed up quickly and then going and playing your best. You had already planned out and executed many times over a 5-minute warm up that was, and you had 15, if I remember correctly, which means that you had 3 times the amount of time to do your emergency warm up, but you didn't figure out what the emergency warm up would look like and then execute it correctly for the first time. This was all done. It's like been there, done that. I'm guessing that had a calming effect on you, right?
Yep. Yeah. Because any audition, any skeleton in the closet is going to come out.
Right.
You know, and you hear it if you have it like a group warm up room. You hear it, or you hear it from your friends who took the audition. Like, oh, they called the excerpt my weakest excerpt. They called the excerpt I'm not good at, or they called it in this order, and and not to be disingenuous, but it's like you got to be ready for that. You know, you have to expect the worst. You know, expect the last to check in, first to play, and they call your worst excerpt first. You know, that's the expectation. Because then if you're ready for that, everything else is kind of like, oh, this isn't so bad. You know,
if your plan is to not plan for all of those specific scenarios that you did, and it's just to play the tuba better than people like you who play the crap out of the tuba and have done all of this planning and for contingencies and all that stuff, if your plan is to still play better than the people who are prepared to that level, boy, that's really the math issue already. It's hard to win these things, right? And you keep on rising to the top, which is awesome, and I'm proud as hell of you for it. But it's really hard to just plan on beating people like you and Aubrey Ford and Seth Horner and who are preparing like you did, but then also going through all of these specific scenarios. It's
a hunger thing too. I found myself like, I think maybe, you said, what happened in December of your senior year? And I'm thinking now, and I'm like, oh, it was probably me thinking, oh, crap, what am I going to do? And, if you recall, I auditioned for 5 grad schools, and I was denied from 4 of them. And that was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I knew I still want to do this thing. I still want the career in music. And I just got to work harder than other people, I guess, or I have to work smarter or something. Something has to change in me, because that was very sobering when it was like, I am not nearly as good as I thought I was.
I had forgotten that, and that's like, it's very generous of you to point that out, because it's like it's never too late to get it. But I remember, and I was friends with some of the people who were at schools, and I'd put in a great word for you because you were a great kid, and and I thought that you had a ton of potential, and not in a, that can be a euphemism for like, isn't really good but might change that. Yeah. That's not what I meant then or mean now. But the feedback I got was like, no, it seems solid, just not up to the level, not quite up to the level of the incoming graduate students, so, but I wish him luck. And then, sure enough, like that was the thing,
it's like that can be related to, and I know I've been cut off early in auditions too. Like I had this one orchestra audition I took, and 2 excerpts in, thank you. And that's super tough, if you especially if you've flown there, because it's like you've worked for 3, 4, 5 months, you paid money, you flight cases, hotels, this got to the venue. You literally play for like 1 minute and you get cut. And it's super disappointing that happens, but it can also be, you know, a moment where it's like, all right, reality check. Which side of this do I want to fall on? You know, do I want to fall on the drown myself in beer side, or do I want to fall on the let's figure this out, let's dissect this? And I don't have my phone on me right now, but every audition I've taken, I've also had like, you know, a wrap up of what happened. You know, why do I think that happened? If I got comments, that was the other thing I forgot to say. Always ask for comments. Okay. And yeah, get those comments and just see if there's something in there that you're like, what? This is crazy. I don't feel like I heard this. You got to take that with stride and figure out how you're going to apply that to the next one.
Right.
Yeah,
I'd also like to point out that if you fly to an orchestral audition with 2 tubas, you're dropping $1,000 to get there more, and then hotel, and then like, you know, all of this stuff, and then you only play for 1 minute. I think it is perfectly okay to either literally drown yourself in beers or do the equivalent of that. Just feel sorry for yourself, be upset, be angry at the world for a day or two or a week, whatever. I don't want a vote for how long it is. But the pattern that I've noticed with people like you who end up getting over the hump is that at some point, that's not 6 months or a year or never, you completely get past they only let me play for a minute, because you have some of the best advice I've ever heard in my life. It was not a musician, it wasn't about music, but you have to abandon all hope for a better past. And I love that phrase, like because hoping for a better past is the stupidest thing any of us can do, right? It's like, if I should have known that they were going to call this excerpt to this, and that was the one thing I was hoping didn't happen, and Andrew came up with a plan I didn't. Is just do something about it now, right? And just to get into action as quickly as possible.
Like you said, I mean, I've absolutely had auditions where I have walked away. You know, I've had auditions where I have got cut after the second excerpt, and I've had auditions where I was runner-up, and both are equally as devastating. you know, and it's devastating for different reasons, right?
Sure.
Because playing 2 excerpts and then leaving, for me, that's like, I don't want to feel this again, because it hurts really bad. And it hurts my soul and it hurts my wallet, and I don't want to do either of those anymore. And I need to figure out a strategy of how to avoid that at all costs. And same thing with getting runner-up. It's like, what did I do that just wasn't enough? Right. Was it an accuracy thing? Was it whatever it is? It can be anything, sound, time, whatever. But more of like you said, taking the time to feel it. It's okay to be upset. You should get upset about it, because if you're not upset, you might not be kicked into action.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You should be mad.
Yep.
and
pain is a great motivator.
Yep. And you should feel that and be like, okay, I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Yep. I took an audition where I was probably more confident than I should have been, and I felt like I will get it. And I had started planning for things, like not like making big moves, I didn't buy a house or anything, but I was already kind of envisioning myself in this other job. And it didn't happen. And that was my special devastation moment, where it was like, I really messed up the way I approached this, and this was after I had won a job. This was going for another job, and so it was like I had the confidence, but it was like I needed that reality check of, just because you've gotten one, that's great and that's awesome and you earned that one, but if you're going for another, you got to restart the whole process.
Such a valuable lesson there, which is somebody who had already won a job on the tuba, which is like, cannot be understated how hard it is to win any military audition, to win any orchestral audition as a tuba player. Just the math is just so stacked against any of us from ever doing that. and you won an audition and had been thriving on the gig, and then you still needed to learn some pretty major lessons. And so it's just, this is what you need to understand, is that when you are preparing for an audition and you're competing against someone like Andrew Dougherty, is that you are constantly learning. You're just constantly learning. And that's not to intimidate anyone. And don't let me or Andrew, who would never say this, or anybody tell you that you can't beat Andrew Dougherty at the Chicago Symphony audition to replace Gene Pokorny. And I have no inside information that he is stepping down. I hope he plays for another 20 years, because he still sounds like that literature was written for him to play.
Yeah.
But at some point he's going to step down, right? And everybody and their mother is going to be at that audition. You could beat Andrew. You can beat anybody. You have to believe that. But you're just constantly learning about auditions and about yourself, and that's, I think that's a great lesson for everybody, is that no matter how much success you have or have had, that it's always about just constantly moving forward, and about awareness, and then about crafting a very intentional plan like you did. I love the fact that you had a planned and already practiced 5-minute warm-up. That's like that, because that's so obvious, right? I mean, that's kind of like, oh, I can't believe he thought to pack a toothbrush on his vacation. It's like, well, it's obvious that you should have that, but I bet the vast majority of people don't have like that planned out to like the letter, and then have practiced it a bunch to the point where you're like, oh, so I do the 5-minute warm-up, and then and I've still got time to chill.
Yeah.
It's not an accident.
Yeah, there's a lot of nitty gritty there for sure.
Right? That's well, but that also, I'm guessing, keeps it fresh for you, right? Where it's just, it's not just Heldenleben, held like through the front door. There's also you're brainstorming the process, you're brainstorming your approach to it, you've thought about what food you're bringing, you've thought about different versions of your warm up, you've all of this. Yeah, wonderful stuff. Well, congratulations on all your success. I hope you, and I don't have any inside information that he's looking for any other jobs than the one he has right now. But if you win more auditions, I'll have you back on here. But so that we can, when we're both old. So when you can see, I just lumped you in with my age. You like how I did that? So I just I did. I just shaved quite a few years off of my resume there by lumping you in with me. So. Yeah, you're old now, man.
I finally feel like the old guy if I'm at an audition, I'm like, oh no, I'm that guy. No.
You can always at work. You can always like look at Jibo and be like, "Oh, I ain't that old." So yeah, there's always somebody to.
There's always somebody older than you.
But yeah, at military auditions, yeah, you're literally getting to be the old guy, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. You're not like right at the cutoff by any means, but it's like, it's like you can see it.
Yeah, it's on the horizon.
It's like you can see it without going all the way to the top of the mast. Yeah, exactly. It's right over there. Well, this has been awesome. I love the specificity of the tiers and the percentages that you broke down. I love the warm up thing that you said. I love just the details about the food you ate and why you chose it. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, actionable advice that you've just shared with all of us. And I think that it's going to help a lot of people to be able to play their best at auditions, which, as you said, there's a science and an art to it. And you didn't use those exact words, but that's essentially what you just said over the last hour, is that there's, auditions are a thing, and you got to approach the auditions as the thing that they are.
Yep.
And I think you're a great example of that. So thank you very much, Andrew.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much.
And that's going to do it for this Winning the Audition.